I was told excitedly during the coffee break that we are trending on Twitter. Apparently that's a good thing.
20 years ago, we couldn't have thought that this is a possible vision. It wasn't unthinkable, and now it isn't anymore. We are on our way. We have made up our mind, and technology is basically starting to take us there. We are far away, we have setbacks, I know, but this is a thinkable future, the left-hand column. We haven't even started to touch the right-hand column, which is in the same way we are decarbonizing the energy sector, we need to dematerialize, or better, decouple the industrial sector. But even then, it's not good enough. That might give us lightweight cars and electrification. It doesn't give us the new mobility system that's shared and autonomous and more social and more accessible. In the middle, we need new high-performing systems, mobility systems, housing systems, food systems. And only then, if they are high-performing and delivering prosperity, we will build the confidence to accept a new positive norm, a net positive norm, that we say it could in fact be the new rabbit rather than the duck, that it is possible to have an economy that prospers whilst natural systems thrive. Now, one of the systems we looked at is an industrial system. It's the carbon system. And we all know it because it has been there forever. The carbon system consists of subsystems. There is a geological carbon subsystem, there is an atmospheric carbon subsystem, and there is a biological carbon subsystem, and all of them have been living in equilibrium all the way to the start of the first industrial revolution. And then the fourth carbon subsystem entered the stage, and that's the industrial one. Now, and that of course has brought things in disarray in terms of depleting a lot of the geological carbon and emitting it into atmospheric carbon, at the same time also disturbing the sequestration capacity of the biological systems. Now, as you look into that system, there are four ways in which the industrial subsystem could in fact be the force to equilibrate the other three again. You can recouple by using other inputs, you can improve your own carbon intensity in production, you can be a helping hand for others downstream to use less carbon, and you can loop it back into the cycle. And the good thing is we analyze that for one company, guess which one, and for all those 8 different levers that are available, there are first technologies and there are business models available today to do that. Now look at that. In 10 years' time, could it be that we are looking back and saying this is a much more natural way to look at an industry to be in fact a manager of carbon within our global carbon system than just to be an emitter and just to be a producer? Could it be that this is the new rabbit versus the old duck, and that we are shaking our heads about something that seems so natural to us today? Thank you.
It'll take me a bit of time before I love carbon, I suspect, because the badness of the phenomenon is more pervasive than the goodness, but power to your elbow. And of course, we know that not only is absolute decoupling required for carbon, but decoupling fast, between 5 and 10% per annum between now and 2050, such that by 2050 we have net zero emissions. And that does extraordinary things to this number. I can't remember who it was, one of the introducers said that it means that the normal ratio between outputs and inputs kind of goes crazy. Well, what it actually does is it goes to infinity. Now, is infinity a good and positive business concept? That's the question. Can we imagine an infinity company whose objective is infinity in terms of carbon productivity? I leave that to business people out there, because you are much better at formulating these nice positive messages than mere academics. Can we grow GDP while reducing carbon? The question to that is definitely yes. There is an enormous amount of evidence to that effect in this country, in the EU, in other countries. A more interesting and urgent question is, can we grow GDP while reducing carbon at the required rate? The answer to that is we don't know, because we've never been there. Annual rates of carbon reduction are normally between 1 and 2%, and we need to go to between 5 and 10%, which is rather a big difference. Does it matter if we can't grow GDP while we get these rates of carbon reduction? And there, of course, we move straight into the degrowth agenda. And I think it does matter, because the one thing that we are certain about in every political serious political force and commentator round the planet is that everyone wants to continue to grow GDP. And if the world has to choose between growth of GDP in the current generation and the end of civilization in a future generation, I'm afraid it will choose growth in GDP in the current generation. This is a terrible and stupid thing, which leads me to think that we're not really Homo sapiens, but unfortunately it's a political fact of life, as I've discovered. But we will need all kinds of policy. We will need economic instruments and regulation, voluntary instruments, innovation, R&D policy and information. There are lots of examples of all that stuff which work. We know what to do, but they're not being applied at anything like the required scale. So I call for carbon pricing. I call for performance standards in buildings and vehicles. I call for energy efficiency agreements. I call for R&D support, institutions like Innovate UK and many others around the world, and for reporting and labelling. We'll need all that and more of them if we are to go in the direction that we require. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
The 10x challenge that John has laid out is that whatever we are doing in conservation today, and lots of the pathways refer to forest protection or indigenous, we cannot get to a 10x solution on conservation unless the world starts to care about the environment in a very different way, which requires a shift in mindset. So the environmental world will continue to work to try and stabilize the forest frontier. We will try to continue to protect forest and other key ecosystems, but unless, even with a big price on carbon, it doesn't happen automatically to address all the drivers that are there. So it requires that we think differently, and the great thing about land use is that in addition to both it's a source of emissions, it's 25% of emissions, it's also one of the only sectors where we can draw down carbon. And this is a chart, I'm not going to go into the detail of it, it's using the horrible term negative emissions. I couldn't agree more with Paul's point that we have to change our language, but all of the IPCC projections show that by mid-century we have to be drawing down carbon from the atmosphere. Simply reducing emissions from the energy sector and the land sector is not enough. So then we create all of these sort of ideas, and it was in Erin's chart, around how we can actually use so-called BECCS, bioenergy with CCS, to draw down carbon. So we create big technological solutions. We simply ignore what we can do with restoring ecosystems, restoring forest health, restoring soil health, because if we get those right, there is a multi-gigaton opportunity to draw down carbon that is not only going to help us with the climate challenge, but also helps with food security, also helps with water security, and many of the sustainable development goals. And that's part of how we have to think in a more integrated fashion. Climate is the biggest challenge, but the sustainable development goals in their entirety need addressing. So it comes with a multitude of co-benefits. And trees are our best carbon capture and storage technology that we will ever come across. No matter all the the whizzo stuff that will come out of Silicon Valley, we will never get better than trees. So the conservation paradigm has to shift, because we have to start thinking about how do we actually use trees more productively. Because if we sequester carbon during the growing and then we can think about how we use them, there are enormous opportunities in terms of how we can recarbonize our economy by using more wood. Wooden buildings, London is actually at the forefront of some of the design of using these mass timber products where we can put much larger, much taller buildings up, and the substitution benefit from displacing concrete and steel and rethinking our built environment by thinking about a new age of wood is extraordinary in terms of what we will be able to achieve going forward. So environmental NGOs are starting to gear up, not just to continue the battle to protect and conserve ecosystems, where I think we can get the 10% improvements, but we're starting to reimagine our role in working with business and working with government to really accelerate ecological restoration, to rethink how we produce food and how we use wood and work with our forests to create a very different future. All of that requires a shift in mindset, and I hope and excited about today exploring more of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Every time we seem to be cracking one problem, something bigger hoves in view, whether it's plastics in the ocean or whatever. And when you teach younger people, you interact with younger people, are they up for the challenge? Because I have to say, if somebody dumped this sort of squirming level of system change in my lap, I'd be quite aggravated. Do you find them creatively engaged?
I think Paul is absolutely right by saying we can't get them through telling them that they have to be 1.2% less bad every year. That's at least not the message that I'm giving my 6 children. I think the message that we should give them is that there is a completely different design out there. Ellen also often talks about the story how a design or a construction student actually had to deliver a semester break project, and he goes back to the professor and says, look, everything has been invented, everything has been designed, constructed. I don't know what to design, construct, invent. And then he starts learning about net positive systems, circular economy, regenerative system, goes back to the professor and says, look, now I want to redesign everything that I see, everything, every car, every bottle, every table, everything that there's a different way to deliver every one of those vital services. And I think that's when also I feel that they're putting their book aside and start listening. That's a positive vision.